Councillors, please stand for the karakia and affirmation read by Councillor Reid.
Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, ki mā tarata ki tai, I hi akine ana ti atakura, hi tio, hi huka, hi ho, ti hei marioro. Let us affirm today that we as councillors will work together to serve the citizens of Selman District, to always use our gifts of understanding, courage, common sense, wisdom and integrity in all our discussions, dealings and decisions so that we may solve problems effectively. May we always recognise each other's values and opinions, be fair-minded and ready to listen to each other's point of view. In our dealings with each other, let us always be open to the truth of others and ready to seek agreement, slow to take offence, and always prepared to forgive. May we always work to enhance the well-being of the Selman District and its communities.
Very well. Good, Nicole, thank you for that. So welcome along to our meeting, 9th of February 2021. We've got a full cohort of councillors present today, and I'd just like to introduce Tegan, who is my two-year mentoree this year, 2021. Tegan's sitting over the back, and I've just asked Tegan to give a short mihi about herself.
Kia ora everyone. So my name is Tegan. I am the two-year representative for Taumatu this year, so I'll just go through my mihi. So kia ora koutou katoa, ko pukukura te maunga, ko matatu te awa, ko katirua hiki hiki, ko katutoka ngā hapu, ko ngai tahu te iwi, ko wipota ki rau ko matawhia o ku matua tipuna, ko John tuku paua, ko Valerie tuku taua, ko Melissa tuku hakui, ko Lance tuku haporo, ko Tegan tuku ingoa, no Utotahi tuku kainga, no Mirihiku ahau. So tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Yeah, so a little bit about me. I am in my third year at university. I am studying a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in Māori and Indigenous Studies, Te Reo Māori and Political Science, as well as a Bachelor of Health Sciences, majoring in Māori and Indigenous Health. So I'm really looking forward to being the two-year representative for this year in Selman. So yeah, thank you for having me today.
Kia ora, Tegan, and I've spent just in the hour that I've spent with you this morning, just really want to honour you for your contribution and desire to be a part of this program. I can, from our conversations, you have a real passion for excellence, a real desire to be a contributor and not just a bystander, and a real focus on Indigenous matters, and that's great. We need more of that, and I'm really looking forward to the year we're going to spend together, and then there'll be plenty more conversations that you're welcome to have with councillors and the staff of this in this space, so that we get the most out of this year. So kia ora. Tab 7, page 6 of 170 is the going to be the first item, but so just for today we're using a new system. I'll be calling out the tab numbers because it's easier on councillors' devices to find where it is, but the numbers are also written down the bottom of your device, so you'll be able to see where we're at if you can't see the numbers. So there's no apologies today, there's no identification of any extraordinary business, there's no further conflicts other than those that are on the register that are being made aware of. Anyone would like to raise any? No, there's no public forum. So the first item is on page 6 or tab 7, minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Selman District Council held on Wednesday the 10th of February. Mover and seconder, Mark Alexander, seconded Epiha.
I've just sent a small correction. I've just noticed a small correction, just a grammatical correction to send it through.
Cool, thank you.
Just changing one word.
Great. Is there any further comments or matters for discussion there? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Next item is on tab 9 or page 19. Councillors, it's the Chief Executive's report. And David.
Mr Mayor, councillors, good afternoon. For the benefit of those who are live streaming, I'll talk to some of the key points in this report. The first one is with respect to the Fitch rating. Council has just been given or had our Fitch rating of AA+ reaffirmed, and that is equal to the highest credit rating given to any council in New Zealand. So councillors, this is something that you should be very, very proud of on behalf of your district. During the rating, Fitch raised Council's assessment in 2 criteria to our highest rating. The agency assessed that our strong revenue autonomy, effective budget balance rules, and flexibility in capital expenditure to manage our total expenditure mean our revenue and expenditure adjustability were both stronger from where they were 12 months ago, and just an acknowledgement that the AA plus rating is also a reflection on the positive outlook for the district going forward. So well done to everybody concerned in that exercise. Second item is the draft annual plan process. The audit field work is coming to an end, finish this week. Main issues that have been, or the main issue that's been raised is with respect to our ability to deliver our CapEx program. So we've had a number of conversations with our key audit people to reassure them that we've only put in there what we expect fully to deliver through to March, as you were, through to June 2021. Key things that you need to know from here on in are as follows. Number one, the process, the next step in the process is the HOT review, Office of the Auditor General. That is scheduled for the 4th of March, which is Thursday of next week. We expect that's normally a 24, 48 hours process, so that really doesn't give us the time to include the adoption of the consultation document in our council meeting for the 10th of March. Thus, the reason that we've scheduled an extraordinary meeting for the 17th of March, 11 a.m. We've scheduled it now. To be honest, I'll be surprised if it takes more than 30 minutes, but it does back up on a previous workshop that we have that morning. Submission period is 29 March through 29 April. Hearings scheduled in your diaries for 13 and 14 May. Depending on the number of submissions that we get, those days might be flexed. Deliberations the week following, 20 and 21, and we're scheduled to adopt on the 23rd of June of this year. Infometrics report is item 3. And in the report, I note that the economy has recovered strongly in the September 20 quarter, up by 0.2%. Consumer spending very strong in Selman, with spending in the September quarter up 6.1% compared with September 2019. House values have appreciated 2.5% in the past year, and I think that figure's probably starting to escalate even further. And dairy farmer payout, unfortunately, expected to be down a wee bit this season, or down slightly to 487 mil this year from 512 mil last year. Mr. Mayor and Councillors, the other item I just wanted to draw your attention to is our staff values. And we've talked about Council's values. In September 2018, the executive team rolled out our new developed values to our staff. They were developed following a series of sessions right across the organisation, over 250 staff involved in the discussion. And these values reflect how we act, how we work, and most importantly, how we treat our stakeholders and each other. There are 4 key values. They are: be a good human being, be brave, think differently, make it happen for Selwyn, and be better together. And these are things that we observe on a daily basis. Staff have really embraced them, living in many different ways, such as some of the internal branding. And as you walk around the various pods, you'll see these values on the wall. Internal templates, staff newsletter articles, adoption of terminology, so it's not uncommon to go to a staff meeting and hear people refer directly to those values and how they have behaved and how they've observed them. And of course the shout outs, which you're all familiar with. So really proud of the way that staff are embracing them. And the final comment in my report, Mr. Mayor, is with respect to Selman Sports Centre, which we're looking to have the soft opening towards the end of April and the official opening in early May. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, David, for that report. Any questions that councillors have of that? There have been none. A mover and seconder. Malcolm and Bland. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carries. We also had one matter for monthly review, which was around the community committees council consultation that will be receiving a report. And I've spoken with Denise about having the community committees report on a monthly basis anyway, in the same way that we have an infrastructure and roading and water and property. So we can expect to see that come through. So it won't need to stay on here as a matter requiring attention. It will just, as a matter of course, be reported to us through that report. Item 2, is the Water Services Bill submission, and I invite Murray and Elaine to the front of the room. Thanks, Murray. The floor's yours.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everybody. So our report starts on page 33 of the agenda, the Water Services Bill. In a way of history, this is on page 34. The Water Services Bill was introduced to Parliament on the 22nd of July 2020 and had its first reading on the 8th of December 2020. Submissions on the bill opened 14th of December last year and will close the 2nd of March, which is not too far away, next month. So this report's been in front of a working group here at Council, so you've been through it and familiar with it. The submission itself starts on page 38. It remains roughly unchanged. There has been a number of additions added around wording to make things sound a bit better, if I can say it that way, but the substantial direction of the submission hasn't changed at all. On the first page, it's page 38, we had a bit of context about who we are as Selman District, our growth, our risk-based approach to coronation so far, and some of the work we've done in that area. So the submission largely stays the same as it was presented in the workshop. We're happy to have questions asked of us, but we'll basically leave it as that.
Thanks, Murray. Good submission. There's one piece that wouldn't mind thinking about how we added in, and we've got in the recommendations here that we agree to start making any amendments and things, so I don't need to wordsmith it now. But just in conversations, there's a piece around New Zealand and around the world. We've always lived beside water sources, and so townships and homes have only developed in places where water's been easily accessible. The Water Services Bill now says we need to find an infrastructure response to provide water to wherever houses are. Which is like the reverse of the way that we've always done things, and there's that opens the door to a lot of extra costs for infrastructure to be provided to places that, if we were thinking about true water availability, wouldn't have been in the first place. So just wondering if we could add something in there. We don't have to go into too much detail, and interested on the rest of the councillors' view on that, because it can end up being very expensive to keep some communities or homes, individual homes of 2 or 3, in some places if council's going to be responsible for those costs.
Yep, no, we're happy to add that to that submission.
Thank you. Councillor Hassan.
Thanks for the report. I'm just curious, we've also aligned our submission in principle with Christchurch City Council and Waimakariri, and we've discussed it with Timaru and Ashburton District Councils. Are there any major variations that they've undertaken that would adjust what you've actually written in our submission? No, they align actually really closely. We're sort of fortunate to be in the same sort of geographical type area. We largely take water from groundwater, so all our issues are aligned with the other 2 councils.
Mark, you. I guess it's more for the sake of perhaps our people who are listening or who may report on this. And there's some really important clauses in the report and the submission. I think from the submission point of view is to reiterate to our ratepayers that we are submitting in support of our current status quo, which is we chlorinate on a risk-based approach, which has been well thought out, has been scientifically proven through our consultants. And so we have a practical or good solution in place, and we want to continue with that to allow some of our supplies to remain non-chlorinated. Not all, some of our supplies do require chlorination, and we've made those decisions already and communicated that quite clearly to those communities why that's happening. One of the things that I suppose concerned me, I guess, was 2 things really, was to sort of signal to our wider community, which I don't think the wider community understands that about the requirements. If you have more than one building on a supply, you are a water supplier. And so I think that needs some real media coverage or even media release from our team here, that there will be obligations on particularly farms and rural suppliers who have multiple houses on their farms to step up and make sure the water is acceptable quality to their tenants or farm workers. The other thing that of note was the advice from CDHB, which requires us to chlorinate first and then apply for an exemption. I guessing the key question for me is when, because does that mean immediately now? Does that mean at a date of introduction of tamata arawhai at the reading of the bill? Because that is clearly an issue we haven't addressed to our ratepayers or given any advice to. So some timely advice around that, around CDHB's timeline or their view of that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I agree with all those points. And to respond to the last one, our submission does request that there is a time where we can actually apply for the exemption before we have to chlorinate. It does seem crazy to chlorinate, put all that money and infrastructure in, and have to go through that pain, then to get the exemption, then take it out again. So we have covered that matter. That's good. Thank you.
Mike, you got on and off. You got
No, the points I wanted to raise, I think, have been addressed. I was concerned with the councils being left, councils across the country will be left in the last man standing position again if currently small private suppliers throw their hands in the air and say this is too difficult, and then council is the fallback organisation that has to supply these schemes, and there's no in the bill, and there's nothing in our submission that sort of helps to address that some of them, if they throw their hands in the air and say we're just going to let council do it, it would be hugely expensive. There's small remote clusters of households that would be very difficult for us to serve in an affordable, equitable way across the district. And whether or not we can add something more to our submission to highlight that I just personally get very frustrated that council is always left as the organisation that carries the can, and it's not our fault. Government want to do this to small rural and lifestyle communities, and government should be picking up the payment, not the ratepayer. So whether we can add something to highlight that if they're throwing this responsibility back at councils, then throwing some cash with it is what should happen. Because currently these small privately owned schemes are operating adequately. They don't appear to be poisoning their users. There's no mass outbreaks of disease that we're aware of. And yet under this scheme, they're going to have to become suppliers. They have to have a whole testing regime and a document management system. And I can imagine many of them just throwing their hands in the air saying, this is way too difficult. Here, council, give me some clean water.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's another unfunded mandate from government to councils. The only reason they exist is because of legislative lack of legislation around it, which is centrally led. And now that the government's tightening up, they should, I think, bear the costs of those changes, not back on ratepayers. I agree. Councillor Ipeha.
Kia ora. Tēnā te mihi kōrua e Murray Elaine. Ngā mihi nui for the report. It stated in the report that you may perceive a conflict regarding Te Mana o Te Wai, clause 25. I'm just wanting to understand what you perceive as could be the conflict, considering that Te Kahui report, Te Mana o Te Wai will be a strong part of this bill. 3.32 page 46. Page 8 of the submission.
I suppose it's the balance between providing water, but then also protecting water. So it's that sort of, there's a slight tension there. Maybe it's overstated, but it's do we supply water at all costs or any costs, or how does that compare with the sort of iwi values? That's the matter we're looking at.
Yeah, I think it's a very valid question too. So thank you very much for putting it in there. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. And the Mayoral Forum will also be putting a submission to the Water Services Bill, which won't be quite as specific as ours is, and will be across some of the Canterbury issues that are there just to reinforce the points that most of us all agree on. Mover and seconder for this report, Alexander and McInnes. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Murray. The next item is reserves charging policy. It's tab 11, and I invite Mark Rikers to the front of the room. Mark. It's 4 recommendations. Firstly, the Council supports the introduction of a fair and consistent charging approach for use and occupation of reserves that can be applied across the network of Council reserves. B, approves the reserves charging policy that forms the basis of charging for use and occupation of Council reserves. C, endorses the draft schedule. And D, seeks and considers feedback from the community. Mark.
Yeah, I didn't want to add too much more to what's already in the report, and I guess it's just wrapping up some of the work that was presented to Council in the briefing session in August last year, and that was bringing together all of that information that we compiled in relation to the existing charges, what that actually found in terms of the inequities, and presented a rationale for going forward in terms of some principles that will underpin a policy, and putting those into place. So it's really just bringing all that information together. The schedule that's on the back, which is a charging schedule, draft charging schedule, that's the schedule that we would be including in the as part of the consultation on the draft long-term plan to get feedback on that. I think overall it presents a very fair picture and helps to address a lot of those inequities that were current prior to the district-wide rate coming forward. So I'm happy to answer any questions on it.
Thank you. So I think it's pretty key comments there. It's a draft. It's a chance as a start to bring things together, and it's open to consultation. We'll hear through the LTP whether or not we've got it right or wrong, and what bits need to be moved around. We've got Sophie and Mark and Deborah.
I think actually Mark, Deborah and Nicole were before me, so I'm not sure how I jumped up the front of the queue there. My only question was, there's no mention of schools in here, and I know that technically, Ministry of Education provides, in theory, reserves for their use and everything else, but there are a lot of schools that exist very close to sports fields and other facilities, and obviously with the swimming pool, they've already figured that part out. But is there any provision, or is there a way of incorporating them in there, because we know they're considerably wanting to use the fields?
Yeah, I think in the more detailed report that I presented, there was some information around schools, and that they would be basically treated the same as the sports users, which would be there'd be no charge to them. But we would need to bring them into the booking system in terms of understanding when they were using the fields or whatever the facilities they wanted to use. So yeah, I could add that into the schedule, just to recognise that there would be no charge for schools using those grounds.
Yeah, thank you. I'd endorse that, but I think there should be a note that they would need to book, because I think that's a potential conflict that some schools and some groups expect to be able to just rock up to the reserve and use it, and that will over time could cause problems when they're not booking. 12 item, let me just find my page for it. Page 40, no, wrong annotation there. Page 56. No, you're still getting used to the system. Booking for casual use, page 61. 12. Questions I have there versus regular is the identification between a Selman user group and a regional non-Selman user group. And this can be tournament or just regular games. An example I can give is post the 2010-2011 earthquake sequence, Canterbury Cricket hired Brookside Park regularly on a weekly basis for Canterbury women's cricket to play their games. And they made a donation for each time they used the grounds, because they were not a Selwyn user group. And where would an organisation like that fall under? Or if a regional sports body were to decide that we've got wonderful grounds and want to hold a tournament here that may not be could have, even in an extreme case, no Selman teams in it. What's our view on hire at that point for an organisation that's external to Selman?
Yeah, I think with those sort of, with tournaments or events that would be Selman users, or mostly Selman users, that would be in accordance with the charging policy, which is there's no charge unless they're using a building where there might be a charge at council's discretion. If there's a sort of a tournament that came in from somewhere else, I guess we would look at that on a sort of negotiated basis in terms of use. I note that some of the other Christchurch City, for instance, they actually have a tournament fee of about I think it was $54 per field. Ashburton has a casual rate that they use, which is variable depending on the size. And it's a daily rate. So it would be so it's something again that could be added in. It hasn't necessarily been something that's come up a lot. And also, I think we also need to balance the indirect economic benefits of having those sorts of events or tournaments in our district in terms of what that brings to local businesses and those sorts of things. So you wouldn't want to put a sort of fee on that would, discourage people using it. Yeah.
Thank you. It would be a similar case for where we're lighting fields to a night playing ability, and they were games for outside of our rohi. I think of either football or rugby now that we're bringing grounds up to the ability to play at night. You can see Canberra football or Canberra rugby decide to bring the grounds up there and past it. Also in those clubs, there is a spin-off in terms of hopefully they'll use some hospitality while they're here, but the benefit is mainly external to our ratepayer. So I'm just throwing that out there as something to consider in the schedule, that we're providing great facilities and that it's actually being acknowledged outside our boundaries. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for the complicated report to read, and I'm saying complicated because it took me a while to read through it. Just with regards to where we have golf clubs throughout our district, are they the ones, when we talk about having long-term leases, that they are in a long-term lease because they're specific to those particular purpose-built grounds that they actually have?
Yeah, with the golf courses, they're covered under the sort of large tracts of land under a formal lease agreement, and the formula there works around the area of land that they have, and because it's reserved, held under the Reserves Act, there's not much else we can do with it apart from use it for a recreation purpose or potentially graze it. So we've looked at what the rate would be if it was for an alternative use like grazing. Then we've applied a public good element, noting that they're providing a service for people to come along and enjoy a sport. And we've also, with that one, we've got an affordability index as well, and that's based around the fact that some of them look after large tracts of land at no cost to the council, so they pay for everything. But they have varying membership, so some might have a membership of 350 and others might have a membership of 150, so there's an affordability index built into that. And also in one case, I think the land was actually purchased by the club originally. On two cases they've actually purchased some land and then it's been given to council as reserve and been declared as reserve, so we have to take all those sort of things into consideration. The other thing we've done with those is benchmark them against other local authorities where we could get information around lease costs for golf clubs. So I've got that information and we've benchmarked that so that we're not, we're in the ballpark rather than right out of it. And you've got to remember that they're looking after large tracts of land. Council's not paying anything towards those clubs, looking after that land at no cost to council.
Thanks for the report, Mark. I just want to refer to your, on page 66, your appendix to draft fee schedule. And just with the specialist seasonal use who've got a negotiated rate, variability with area, facility type and level of investment. So these clubs that use a specialist surface, maybe like hockey for example, will they know prior to the LTP consultation what their amount is that they've been looking to pay?
Sorry, Nicole, I'm just your children play hockey?
Yeah, they play hockey, but I'm asking as a general and using that as an example because there is no actual sports listed on there of what is for specialist seasonal use.
So, just so we can have the question as a general answer to this.
Yes, as a general answer.
No other sports club is in here asking the specific question.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, the sorts of specialist uses that we're talking about are the artificial surfaces, such as hockey and athletics and softball, skin diamond, so those sorts of things. In the report, we're talking about a nominal fee, so we're not talking about something that's going to be sort of right out of the affordability range for the groups. We are having some discussions. I think Douglas has had discussions already with Canterbury Hockey around that particular one to get an idea how that might work going forward, because there are some additional costs with those sort of facilities that probably there should be more of a contribution from the users than others. But in saying that, you've got to also consider, that the cost of maintenance of those over the period of their life compared with a grass surface is not actually much difference. So it's and the amount, based on the amount of use that they can get. I think one artificial surface equates to about 6 or 7 playing fields, grass fields, in terms of utilisation. So when you add up the mowing costs and fertilising and everything else you do, it's actually not a huge amount of difference. But whether we'll have an exact cost over the next few months, we'll certainly be progressing discussions with the groups concerned around those.
I mean, my concern obviously is that these clubs aren't going to have surprises and they can't participate in the LTP discussions, that they have an idea of what they will be looking to be paying.
Just to confirm what Mark said, so we met with Canterbury Hockey and Wakirikiri last year, talked about fees. We're going to meet here next week, which includes both parties plus CAST, which is the Canterbury Artificial Sports Trust, plus someone from Sports Canterbury, and I think someone from Christchurch City Council. So yeah, we'll have all those discussions.
I support the work that Mark has done. Great work, Mark. Well done. It provides clarity for all our sports and reserves users. They are very modest fees, and I hope, and actually I'm sure as councils will demand that they remain modest. The range of health and social benefits from exercise are all well known, and we're on that space. And just referencing Mark's discussion about people coming here, well, isn't that what we're all about? We want people coming here. We want to come to Selman to help our businesses thrive, and our accommodation providers and food and beverage suppliers and all that goes with it, and putting Selman into the sun. If there is a problem that becomes an issue, we'll address that. But until that happens, I think we should just pay business as usual and carry on making it affordable and an exciting place to be.
Yeah, really follow up on what Grant said. That we put the facilities in for people to use, and we don't want barriers in any way to stop them using them. But one thing I would say is that right at the start, we should make our fees such that we don't feel awkward about asking for them, because we don't want people then going to our various funds, such as the community fund applications, to pay for the use of these facilities. So if we're realistic, honest and upfront, that the fees that we charge are reasonable. And I take what Deb Hassan has said about the golf clubs. I always felt that they were we could have a look at that, and they seem to be paying more in some cases than they would have needed to be. I'm pleased that we're looking at it, but we've got to get it right at the start so that people aren't then saying, well, it's just too much, we can't afford it, because that's not what we want. But we have to accept as a community that there are costs involved in running everything, and that they should be used. The users should have to shoulder some small portion of that cost.
Yeah, I'm just going to draw remind everyone looking at funding applications on page 63 of our agenda that actually what's proposed is actually a reduction in income to the council. So we are being very fair and reasonable. In fact, overall, with a reduction of income, the organisations are going to be better off. Some will face a little higher charges because they're not paying anything at the moment. And that I wasn't proposing that we deny the opportunity for other outside organisations to come, but that they do contribute, because our ratepayers at the end of the day are paying for these. And whilst we've enjoyed free and equitable access to our neighbouring facilities, our larger neighbour to the east has started down a slippery slope of charging non-Christchurch residents higher fees for some of their facilities. And while I don't advocate for that, I think it's not unreasonable to seek some contribution to costs. So I too support the policy. I think it's been a great deal of work, and we've been waiting for this since district-wide rating came in, and I think it is an important part of our upcoming LTP.
Thank you. I'm not interested in a tit for tat with anyone. I think we treat people as people, and we've got facilities that are awesome, and the more people that use them, the better. If we mow the lawns, why not have them full all day with kids and families and sports clubs enjoying them? We'll have to mow them twice for that same level of activity. And I love every time I drive around Selman and see our fields and sports fields being used, and that's right through summer and winter. Every time we drive through a rural town and the rugby lights are on at night and there's a netball training going on, I just think that's why we build this stuff. So let's maximise as much use as we can, and have a fair charging regime right across the district. So thanks, Mark, for bringing that all together. It's a maze of work that you've managed to bring together for us. So mover and seconder, Bob, happy to move. Nicole, second. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Thanks, Mark. The next item is item 4, is plan change 67, and a decision on how to consider the Willfield Limited plan change request. As members, the recommendation is that we accept the request for notification, which will mean that this process goes through a Resource Management Act process. We'll hear about the report, and then no doubt there'll be some discussion on it.
Good afternoon, Council. You have in front of you plan change request number 67, which is being currently known in-house as West Melton South. The recommendation is for Council to accept the plan change for further processing. The consideration of the request at this stage is limited to a course scale assessment of the contents of the plan change to ensure that, firstly, the content and implications of the proposal can be generally understood, and secondly, that the request is not in direct conflict with other planning processes and statutory instruments. There are not considered to be sufficient grounds to reject the plan change request when assessed against the statutory powers available to Council under the RMA, and so the most appropriate course of action is to accept PC 67 for notification. The RMA affords the opportunity for the plan change proponent to request changes to the district plan and prescribes the timeframes that Council must adhere to in processing the request. The recommended option to accept PC 67 for notification will enable the request to be publicly notified, submissions and further submissions received, and for the substantive merits of the proposal to be considered at a public hearing. Accepting the request for notification does not signal that Council necessarily supports the proposal. The opportunity remains for Council to recommend that the request be supported, amended or opposed at a subsequent hearing. The benefit in accepting the request is that public input can then be received to inform the overall assessment of the merits of the proposal.
Thank you for that. So today it's a procedural decision. We're not here to debate the merits or otherwise of the proposal, but I do think that it's the context that it sits in is important for us to consider when we know that we've got a number of other plan changes that have been received, some inside previously identified infrastructure boundaries, but many outside our previously identified boundaries. And this won't be the last time that we have a report come to council like this. Whether the rest of them end up in the spaces, each one will be determined on its own merits, whether it meets the thresholds to come here, and our staff are currently working away on that. But since November, having received the number of plan changes we have for over 11,000 houses in 3 months, we're certainly faced with some massive infrastructure challenges to make sure that we can service those proposed spaces, and our staff are also meeting the challenge of a huge amount of work and homes that we were expecting over a many number of years rather than just over 3 months. So to you and your team, thank you for what you're doing behind the scenes, and acknowledge that there's a huge amount of work that goes on. Moved by Councillor Alexander and second by Councillor Blanche. Councillor Hassan.
Yes, I did have a query. If we go to page 69, we actually see that there is a mention of the fact that we own some utilities, or Orion owns some utilities. Are these utilities within that subdivision proposal itself, or do they butt up alongside it?
They are within the plan change area.
That's all right.
Thanks for this work, Rachel, and for the explanation at the beginning about why this is something that we're considering and why you're recommending that we accept and go forward with this process. And I mean, essentially with the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, it's really changed the playing field, and you know, the plans that we had before they're in for the urban boundaries that are in the Regional Policy Statement have really, it sits above that, the National Policy Statement, which is why we're looking at all these plan changes that have come through. And there has been much concern in the West Melton community about these plan changes. At the last Residents Association meeting, I got a number of questions about the process and why this was happening. And so, I mean, we're in a position as council, you know, we're given these options and now we have to make a decision. And so this is then where the community can then have their say and be able to say about it. So it's not that at the moment that we're not listening to what they have to say. This is just a process that'll start another process. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Sophie.
Karen, thank you very much. It's as Sam said, there's an awful lot going on in this space, and as Nicole said, West Melton is extremely interested in this and other plan changes in their area. My main question, I support the motion. I have a question though about some of the information in their outline development plan regarding the use of the phrase low and medium density because none of it seems to fit the definition of medium density, but they're using it in their maps, and I'm just wondering if there's a way of clarifying that somehow.
I completely agree that the use of the term medium density is completely different to anywhere else in the district. What they're doing is lifting existing provisions for West Melton that describe medium density in that way and just applying them to a different part of the township. So it's a legacy issue because we're talking about the operative plan as opposed to something that we would use in the proposed plan.
So that's really interesting because, you know, when you, a lot of the time, you know, in other plan changes, it's described as households per hectare and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I know we're probably going to get some submissions pointing a lot of the density aspect out there because it is the time that we live in. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. And that's a really good point, because we've gone through the last 3 years around our district plan review to try and rationalise the use of language to make it easy to understand for everyone. So if there is any way of being able to ensure that whatever comes out of this process aligns with everything else that's been done through the district plan, I think that's important. And even if that's through conversation with the developers and what ends up coming in, I think we should be trying to be as aligned as we can with that DPR process. Mover and seconder has been Bland and Alexander. Any further questions? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carries. Thank you. The next item is on page 86 through 89, tab 13. It's a solid waste report. Gareth, welcome along.
Thank you, Mr.
What's yours?
Good afternoon. First off, let me start with apologies from Andrew. He's unwell today, so you got the beating. The substitute's been brought in. Not subject knowledge expert in this. Andrew's report pretty much is presented as read. Quite happy to take some questions back to Andrew for councillors, and if I can answer any, I will. There's two real key highlights in this month's report for councillors' awareness. The first one being around the success of the recycling bin contamination crew out there. There's been a lot of issues in the media and around the districts, around our region in general, about recycled materials going to landfill from being contaminated bins. And as you can read from the report, we put a crew, or Andrew arranged a crew, put a crew out there, and we've been pretty successful. One bin in December, no rejections in January, and everything's looking more positive going through. Certainly some bins are being rejected, but as Andrew highlights in his report, it's pretty obvious why those bins are being rejected. People are still putting inappropriate material in there. The other aspect of what Andrew presents here is some of the improvements that are being presented with recycling facilities. Particularly, I don't know how many councillors have been down to the resource recovery park since the first phase of the Reconnect project. Things are really starting to take shape down there and be presented well. So that's it from me. We'll see some questions pop up.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had a question from my wife and some of my neighbours. We actually happened to have the recycling bin ordered last week, with quite a number of bins receiving tags. So most of the bins that are tagged are still collected for recycling. They're not tagged straight to rubbish or anything. It was unclear when you got a tag on your bin what happened to it.
Yeah, you got that naughty boy mark from school. I got one as well, Councillor. I shouldn't have done. Yes, those bins are collected. They're just an information tag to say to people, look, these items are in your bin. They're not going to stop the bin being collected. They're not stopping the bin from going off through the recycling facilities, but you should think in the future, do not put those items in there.
The follow-up question was at Monday night's Walston Residents Association meeting was, can residents get the new pamphlet that shows what should be in there? Is there a sticky one available from here so that they can replace the one that's currently under the bin lid with an updated one so they know what should and shouldn't be in there? Do we have them here at the counter?
Yes, I believe we do. I'd like to ask Andrew to make sure they're available.
Thank you for your report. I hope you can answer this question or get some information. Page 86, we have a sustainability forum, and it's noted that we have a small team of staff looking at next steps for sustainability at Selman District Council. Could you give me an idea of what the next steps you would be looking at for a sustainability at Selman District Council? For example, what do we do when we retire our furniture? Where does it go? How is it recycled and reused? What do we do with our library books when they're no longer needed? Do we actually send them overseas, for a less group of people to actually gain advantage by them? There's all these other options and how we actually look at recycling, destruct and reconfigure. And I'm just curious as to understanding our sustainability with regards to the products that we use every single day around around our office, our computers, as another example, our phones. What process do we do as a business to actually recycle, reuse?
I can answer that. The substitute can pass it over to the substitute. There's waving his hands over in the corner there, Councillor. Murray's on the Sustainability Forum.
Good question. Following on from your carbon footprint assessment last year and the adoption of the climate change policy, a small team of council staff, which includes myself, the group manager, people capability and culture, Andrew as the former chair of the Sustainability Forum, and Monique Bowers, who's the current chair of the Sustainability Forum, have been working through a literature review of what's happening around the country, and all the roads led back to Christchurch City. So we're in the process of picking Christchurch City's brains regarding how to start the sustainability journey. That meeting was meant to happen on Tuesday, but a number of people were off work and unwell, so we're planning to do that in March.
I understand from the staff that one of the key considerations about reducing carbon, and in some cases methane, is a reduction in councillor numbers.
Is that voluntary?
The question I had was around closed landfills, and I'm sure you would advise us, but maybe a note back to that if there are any landfills within Selman which come out of that report on page 87, we're obviously really keen to understand what our risk to our community is from those. We have, I think, Audit and Risk is also looking at that. I think
we have undertaken that in the past with Audit and Risk. If we think we need to revisit it, we will do. Yeah. It was a question of Andrew, but apparently there was a meeting of staff and community members up at Windwhistle around that area for enlarging the distribution or the collection of rubbish in the area, and I'd just like to know what the outcome of it was. So it's a question to take back.
Yes, certainly, and I know Andrew did go up there last week and met with people.
Thank you.
Yeah, following on from the meeting, Andrew met with the Tui Valley group who take their recycling to Medford. So looking up that length of road from Windwhistle to Coleridge, there seemed to be a fairly good uptake of interest, and also from the Windwhistle school. So we're just working together with the group to see what can be achieved. Distance is obviously deterring in those areas in terms of efficient networks, but good dialogue is continuing.
Kelly, thank you very much. You're a more than adequate substitute. Thank you for coming. I just wanted to sort of, I love the bit about in the report about the community and bulky waste days, and also the working with ag recovery on the farm waste day. It's really good that there are these other groups who are able to deal with more than we can using our normal waste management processes, and they come down regularly. And also just another plug that the Sustainability Forum do a fantastic job within the council, but it is quite often people just doing it in their lunch break or on top of their additional jobs. So thank you very much to all of them for the time that they spend, keeping tabs on what we can and can't do. Oh, and as to library books, I believe a great deal of them go to the Lincoln Scout Group for their annual book sale.
That's feedback.
Kia ora, Gareth. Thank you. I just get some feedback from me to Andrew on the process so far. I'm appreciating the lead time and tagging out the bins. It gives an opportunity for residents, including myself, to educate themselves on the appropriate use of the recycling bin. So thank you.
Thank you. There's a couple of items that are mentioned here. Sustainability has been talked about, but the H2 solutions and pyrolysis, there's a lot of interest from ECAN councillors that I've received over the last month, and they're interested in coming out to Selman for a visit to understand how we deal with compost, what we're doing with our resource recycling park, and I think that the pyrolysis discussion should fit into there as well. The tyres and fires that have been happening, not inside Selman, but for ECAN have been a major thing that they have interest interest there as well. So I'll be talking with Andrew about setting up a meeting out here in the coming months.
6th of next Friday.
It'll be, okay, thank you. Mover and seconder for receiving this report. Great, Bob and Jenny. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thanks, Gareth. Item 6 is the Transportation Monthly Update. Mark and Andrew, welcome.
Yes, good afternoon, councillors. A fairly detailed report in terms of some of the areas I'm working in, but I'll just give you a bit of an overview and a bit of an update on some of those things. Transport Activity Management Plan, as you know, that's the engine room to our LTP development in terms of from a transportation side of things. So we have been busy working on that, making sure our information is present and correct, and obviously getting our programs through, draft programs through to the NZTA and answering all their questions. As I stated in there at the moment, from a regional perspective, anyway, from NZTA, they are supportive of our draft program and the type of increases that we're seeking. As I said before, they're not unrealistic. We're trying to keep them realistic so it makes them a bit more palatable for NZTA. And so we've been doing that, and also we've been working with Audit New Zealand over the last week or so, and before that as well, in terms of going through all the various aspects of the activity plan that they're interested in and seeing how all the numbers stack up and where they come from. Just very quickly, you may be aware from a recent presentation from the CE of NZTA that I think she gave you some pretty straightforward messaging around affordability of the land transport program going forward, and that they've got some quite serious funding problems or issues ahead of them. I think she is managing expectations and managing disappointments, perhaps, in that regard, into what may occur in terms of funding approvals. We wait and see in terms of how how SDC ourselves stack up, and we're having a regional transport officers group meeting tomorrow, which we hope NZTA may be able to give us a bit of an update on how they got on with presenting our case, as well with all the other cases in Canterbury in terms of the funding for the future traffic and transport programs that we're aspiring to. So watch the space. The other item in there is the Kimberley Regional Land Transport Plan. The draft plan was adopted at the last meeting, which me and Sam attended. That was good. We got a few things ironed out in regards to some Selman issues regarding some of the terminology relating to the state highway safety upgrades. It appeared a section had been missed, but it was all in the description, and a change of one word from basically require to Selman fix the problem. The other thing too is of interest is how our program stacks up with everybody else's, and the likes of the two next big Prebbleton intersection upgrades are top of priority of the regional list for improvements, which is good. And also the $60 million Rolleston interconnection NZTA up infrastructure project is sitting in there quite happily as well. So that's looks like we've got all the ducks in the row for us, and that obviously was going out to consultation to the public in terms of that draft plan. Just moving on to the plan change requests, of which you had one of them just before in terms of approval for notification. As I said there, 11,000 new lots when you add them all up, a lot of them in Rolleston. And as I said in there, we're working really hard in terms of trying to manage the synergy around those plan changes in regards to the impacts on the transport network or the local network, and what we may need to do to respond to those. It may be that, even with my best intentions to basically try and capture everything at this point for the draft LTP, there may be a few things that we need to come back and have a look at in terms of needing to marry in with how those plan changes are working out, and getting things coordinated. Colgate Road's legalisation in there, just said that the consultation on that closed yesterday. We hope to have an update to you today in terms of if we received any objections to that. We haven't been able to ascertain that from the court yet, but we're working on the basis of no news is good news. I touched on before the NZ Up Rolleston State Highway project. Just following on from the specific reference in there in the report, NZTA have received 4 tenders to go to the next stage, which is the detailed business case for all that program, which includes the flyover and the upgrades along the state highway in and around Rolleston. Yeah, so 4 good tenders, and they're looking pretty strong. They'll be working through that process to see what comes out of that, and essentially they are looking for that detailed business case to be completed by the end of the year, which then means that that can go to NZTA for funding approval for the next stage, which is essentially implementation. So they're on a fairly tight time track for that at the moment. Greater Christchurch Partnership, talked about there with the PT Futures being adopted, that's great. And also we're starting the process of working into with the 2050 Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan. And of course, an important part of that now is how we bring MRT into that discussion, because we may need to pull some fairly strong levers in terms of how we configure land use to make that system work, and vice versa in terms of a sustainable transport system going forward. The only last one there was a bit of an update from my last report in terms of CTOC, and for all the best intentions and information that we had before Christmas, that we thought we had everything under control with CTOC, or how it was going to be managed by City Council going forward. They subsequently, early in the new year, turned around and said, no, they're not going to include us and WIMAC and others in their signals maintenance contract. And we were basically now having to decide how we manage that in terms of going forward. And at this stage, we're looking at having a discussion with our neighbours in terms of coming up with our own maintenance contract to tie together all our various sets of signals and sort of try and get an economies of scale. That's to do with the maintenance, the operation of them in terms of when they switch on and when they switch off and all that fancy stuff. Fortunately, that's still being managed through the city, so you don't have to worry about things all being turned off all of a sudden, but I just thought I'd make that elaboration. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And yeah, we might just see if there's a different response we might be able to receive with a bit of pressure reply, because it seems really silly that we're working together as a Greater Christchurch space on all other sorts of transport, and then for the lights maintenance to suddenly slip. It's pretty ridiculous. So thank you for the update there. And just to add, the Regional Land Transport Draft plan includes updates on all of our state highways, and all for different parts of them, and including 75 but outside Tautapu, but on that link, and for 73 into Darfield, and obviously along through Rolleston, but all the way down to Rakaia with the work that NZTA has already done. We're looking for the completion of that work, which is about 3 years old, 3 years old now. And I guess just a report back from the meeting, there's a fair amount of concern amongst the mayors of Canterbury that the places within the Greater Christchurch area are receiving too much attention, and those outside are not receiving enough. So there's another piece of work to understand all the projects under $2 million, and that will be circulated around the region, just so that we can actually see there is actually a whole lot of other work that's going on that's not mentioned in this plan, because at the moment it looks very city heavy, or greater city heavy, and we're in the fortunate place of that being us, but also we've got to make sure the rest of the network's fit for purpose too. Mark and Deborah.
Thank you, and thank you, Andrew, for your portion of the report. Just seeking further clarification under 4.3 plan change requests. You are endeavouring to recover from the developers those cost implications for upgrading our transport network that the new residents will impose. Is that what you're saying?
The ultimate outcome to that is yes. As you know, I always chase down every single dollar I can on behalf of the council. But essentially, this plan change process doesn't really talk about that too much at this stage. That sort of more kicks in around when the plan changes have been approved and when the subdivision consents come in, and then we start applying consent conditions on subdivisions. The other avenue which I have got dialed in is around where we've got already identified large transport projects in our LTP, and by that means we can then start applying development contributions to them. So we're sort of trying to cover it from both ends, but yeah, at a plan change, we sort of don't get it necessarily into those conversations too much at that stage. It's a very theoretical or so-called planning exercise.
Thanks very much for the report. 5.3 on page 92, unsealed roads assessments.
We'll move on to
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was going through the whole report. So.
Just talking about the business case for the flyover particularly, it's great to see that producing, but when you look through the report in its entirety, there seems to be a number of key work streams all coming together at the same time. We've got ECAN talking about public transport, NZTA and Wakatahi talking about public transport, the overbridge, and we did have a very good proposal from the Carter Group around an integrated transport hub, and I think Ralston is growing so strongly now that whether it's that proposal or it seems like a logical time to try and discuss at the end of that flyover whether that should be our transport hub area, because you've got the rail, the MRT, possibly the road access to State Highway 1, potential pedestrian access as well. I just wonder how strongly we're advocating on that point that maybe we should roll that whole project into one.
Can't necessarily roll it all into one, but certainly through the development of the program business case with the NZTA, which was set up the whole NZ Up thing that has now been approved for funding, we supplied all that information to the NZTA and their consultants, including the Carter Group proposal, which was very good, and we certainly have been strongly advocating that that would be a future transport hub, you call it, maybe I call it a bigger and better park and ride area in terms of accessing, whether it be a rapid bus or an MRT system. But certainly that is being advocated, and the fact the role that the flyover is really important to be able to get people on a multimodal basis from both sides of the state highway across, backwards and across safely. And it would make, to me anyway, sense to actually consolidate that sort of arrangement in around the base of the flyover on that side of the highway and the railway line, because we've got more area over there to play with. And certainly from Carter's perspective, merging that into their future retail development would be of obvious benefit to them, but it would also be benefit to us. But I think it comes down to not only the question about the flyover itself and where it actually ends up, which we all think we know where it will do, but it also is dependent on the confirmation through the MRT business case on where that corridor for MRT should be. And again, I think we're all assuming it's going to be centred around the rail line, but they have to work all those options through from a ground zero perspective to come up with the answer what we think it should be. So, short answer to your question, yes.
I think what I'm really reiterating is that we've got a time in our cycle here where we can have a period of no regret. But once that land is sold and constructed, it's a very difficult job to try and knock down buildings and build them up. So whether it's a requirement for us to stand in the market and acquire land or use the public works centre, whatever it is, I just don't want us to get here or the council of the future and say, what the hell were we thinking? Why didn't we get that land when the opportunity was available?
Thanks, Robbie. Mark, let's move on to the next piece of the report. So just Grant's comments here, let's think about that in a property sense. There's property and transportation there. We might not be able to answer it today, and you've given a bit of a clue as to where that's sitting.
I can answer part of it very quickly. We are fortunate that we own the land, either ourselves, NZTA and Kiwi Rail, along the alignment of where the flyover is, we are assuming to go and where it's going to land. But I think Councillor Murray is completely right. We need to be having those early conversations still with the likes of the Carter Group, who own that bulk of that land over that side of the highway.
Agreed. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, kai konihera. Yeah, the take it as read, just I'll highlight a couple of ones, and one will be under 5.3 Unsealed Roads, so I'll just add a bit to that. There's Unsealed Road assessments, I think just over the summer, Unsealed Roads do deteriorate and things like that. Just noticed a few things, as I said in the report there, with associated with additional traffic, particularly heavy traffic, that there's been some deterioration of some roads in some areas. So we have spent all our maintenance money budget for this year, so we weren't planning to do any more, quite nicely, but in terms of identified work, we've got about $2 million that's already been identified, so that's for next year and future years. So the budget's about the same, about $1 million again next year. So that's just for maintenance spending, another about $1 million for grading and general routine maintenance. So it's always a challenge on Unsealed Roads, as we've discussed before. So if things come up and sections of the road deteriorate, then we just have to sort of deal with it or sign it or get okay to spend more money. So that's what that was highlighting. It is a challenge, and it will continue to be. It's not necessarily an area we're going to get more funding in the future. So that was one thing, and Council has probably have some more comment on that. So, the next one we're going to talk about more was speed limits, and there's a bit of discussion, and I get some emails, a lot of requests for reduction of speed limits, and I've reported previously in terms of briefing and things like that, working with the new speed limit rule and delaying things, but it's whether there's a feel for whether council wants some of those things dealt with before then, under our existing bylaw before that changes or not. Just probably seek some feedback at some stage if you got a feeling for that. It's almost a report in itself, I think, for speed limits, but whether we want to do that beforehand, tidy up some anomalies that are there. We've migrated our data to the new register just to see how that goes, but we've got some sites that have identified as part of that Red Lake Huts, for example, that have got signs up there but aren't included in our bylaw, so we do need to add them, and we can do that as part of the register, but we could do that now before that's in place if there's a will to do that, and also extending speed limits further out the 80k rural roads ones, where we want to do that, or align with the development around Ralston, which isn't going to have a problem in terms of the growth that's going down Springton Ralston Road, Selman Road, Lincoln Ralston Road, reducing the speed limit roads. It's just a bit of a given, but you still have to go through the consultation process, but it'll get the sign off by NZTA just because it's growth around the township. So there were two of the main things I was going to mention, and also just the road safety and the work that Jess and Seth are doing, and Jess, the young drivers, the leading learners have been really successful, and as the two new classes came out, they were filled within 24 hours, so that's why there's actually an additional third group they go through, and the feedback from police that hadn't attended before and things like that has been really positive, so it's a really great thing that we're doing, so that's just continue to go really well, and always getting positive comments and just building on and refining all the time, so happy to answer any questions outside of that or other issues in the report.
Thanks, Mike. Just touching on the speed limits piece, it's nice to be able to think about it in one go and have everything, without just ad hoc changing speed limits all over the place as requests might come in, but we can consider them as a network. But then also we've got to a space where there's quite a number now, and it seems a bit arbitrary to say, well, no, we're just going to wait for the review and you've got another 8 months, you missed the deadline, when it's only an annual process that we go through. So it's sounding to me like we've reached the threshold where actually there's a good reason and a base of evidence to say that we should do an interim review on a number of the butts that have come to us. So we can report back on those, capturing those, and where we can go in a future council meeting for is that what you're after? I think that'll be good. The other thing I'd say in terms of speeds, people complain about speeds. It's a bit of a given that people exceed the speed limits around the place, and I don't think any of us here can actually stand with a head in their heart and say we don't do it. And just with the data that we do have around the place, just changing the speed limit won't necessarily reduce speeds, but it should reduce those high-end ones, is what the idea is. But as an example, we reduced the speed on Madison's Road and Jones Road down to 80 kilometres an hour. We've got the speed indication devices there. On Madison's Road, 56% of people exceed the speed limit, and on Jones Road, that's about 40%. Which is fairly typical. That's just from the data we're getting in there. But the mean operating speeds around about the speed limit is about 78 on both of those. So people do exceed the speed limit, and we're not going to ever live in a society where people don't do things like that. But interesting, when coming into a township, we've got a device on Birches Road coming into Prevalent now. 76% of people exceed the speed limit there, and that's in the 60k area. The mean operating speed is 65, so that's actually quite high, and it's an obvious start to a township. It's called threshold, but that is just coming to a township from a rural area. That's what people do.
How we can change that, I'm not too sure, and just putting up a sign or extra warnings in place, we should be doing that, but it won't necessarily resolve the issue. That's all.
Thank you. Deborah and Malcolm.
Thanks very much. Look, I've got a couple of questions, and they are around 5.3 on 92. Unless there's an increase in funding, work will be deferred. The reality is, how much funding do we actually need to improve our rural roads? We often talk about the 2 million or the 1 million, right? Do we really need to be more realistic and look, given the population increase, the number of vehicle uses has just happened in the past 10 years, do we need to look at that 2 million actually going to 6 million? When we're actually assessing how much funds we need to put into our rural roads. That's one question.
Margaret, have you got an answer? I haven't got an answer, but I know that we've already identified for maintenance meddling alone, we've got $2 million already identified that we have to wait till next year before we can even do half of that. So it's the same question we have every long-term plan and annual plan, and every time we rationalise down the number because we don't want a 10% general rate increase. It's funded out of the general rate, and we see a number that's above a 6, we go, no. And you presented us with an 8 and a 6 this year, and we've still said, hang on, you bring it down. So it's a very valid question, but it comes before us at least annually, and we continue to say spend less.
And with regard, my next question is regards to the warning signs, right? Do we have a warning sign that's able to be put up advising people on a shingle road, corrugations, slow down? The reality is the amount of corrugations that are turning up, not just where you come to the end of an intersection, but backflowing right through a road. Selman Road is just chronic for the shingle part of Selman Road. It's just chronic for corrugations. And I've noticed it with a lot of our rural roads now, the corrugations, people are breaking a lot earlier before they get to the intersection. So the corrugations are actually quite an issue, and they make driving very, very difficult, with regards to vehicles and maintenance on vehicles. So I know we can't cure everything, but a sign warning people corrugations up ahead might just make them realise what they're entering into with regards to their driving skills and ability. The reason why I'm saying this is because if you've got a young driver who's not used to being on a shingle road and hits corrugations, they can very easily turn up on one of our large drains. So I'm just highlighting that because that's a true incidence of what actually happened in this case. So I'm just really conscious of the fact that if we've got a sign warning of corrugations, can we please use them?
Corrugations specifically, but every unsealed road's got gravel road warning signs. So, and everything that goes with that, loose gravel, corrugations. So there's no specific sign for corrugations.
Thank you. Grant. Sorry, Malcolm, you were next. Grant.
Thank you. Yeah, drives to the conditions, I believe, is what it says in the road code. Mark, I'm really disappointed to see that once again the logging industry is ripping the crap out of our roads. This is a thing that happened a few years ago, and we had a lot of difficulty with logging operations, culverts, roading. Is this logging operation finished up there, or is it an ongoing thing?
And there's a few small blocks up there that is basically finished there now, so they'll be moving to another one somewhere else, with St Dalthorpe or any other roads around there. So yeah,
I was at a conference last year or whatever, and Waitaki District Council have taken this head on, and they've got a tiered rate on some of the areas in Hamden where they have large forests to try and get a bit back from the logging industry. Is that something we should investigate, or is that a pretty hard and nebulous piece of work?
It's pretty hard. I mean, we're funding them to have the harvest there. They pay road usage charges, and that's how we get funded. So
that was an objective.
Yep.
The report you attached is, as we all know, fascinating reading. It's we've got the largest roading network in Canterbury, and trying to service it with the population that's sort of the core of Christchurch. we've got 3/4 of the sealed network that Christchurch has got, which is staggering in itself when you start thinking of the urban roads they have. So the challenges our staff face are manifest, and the budget's not going far enough, and we all know that. The key question, I suppose, and it's not for the staff, it's for the councillors, is how do we prioritise this? And the Mayor just spoke about that. How far up the priority chain are these desires to do something? And probably, if we think about it, we need to move further up the priority chain. Deborah, you've just, particularly our rural network is continuing to find significant challenges around drivability. Just talking about the upgrade program, I was lucky enough to speak to some Ashburton councillors about the for want of a better word, the cheese grater median between the road. They are, rather than being safety improvement, they think it's a really major risk factor to traffic safety, particularly around rural vehicles travelling on the road at low speed and not being able to pass in a safe manner because of the single lane carriageway. They have grave concerns that actually will cause more accidents than it saves. So I guess that's just reflecting what they said to me. Lastly, I noticed one of the campaigns you've got coming up is intersection campaigns, which is a Pua Hardy annual. I think I might have mentioned to you, Andrew, in an email. I was lucky enough to strike a wonderful English tourist who said that they had similar problems in their county in England, and they'd reduced intersection accidents by a factor of 5 by painting yellow lines from the warning sign to the stop sign every 10 metres. So it was a line across the roadway to the centre line. And it was incredibly effective in a way of reducing. So I wonder whether that idea can be followed up with the NZTA or Whakatu Tahi to see whether that's been assessed as an option in the UK.
Well, thanks, Sam. I'll be the first person to say that people don't seem to see signs, but that's not quite right. Drivers, they do see signs, but they don't choose to comply with them. If they don't see the signs, then it's an issue that the council should be addressing. But of course, they see the signs, they don't see the danger, and that's the problem. And you've touched on Prebbleton, and I think that there's a case there perhaps for a traffic calming feature at the start of. I'm certainly not an engineer, but I do think that would be a prime example where you do need to perhaps narrow the road a little bit or put some sort of features there so that people coming from Lincoln actually see the sign. Because what is the tendency for people to do, and you'll know that better than I do, is that they don't slow down until they've passed the sign, because they have this belief that if the sign says 50, I'll slow down from 80 when I reach that 50k sign. That's right throughout the country. So Lincoln is another example, but it has a roundabout at one end which naturally slows them down, housing at the other entrance. But Prebbleton is an example where, I've been to a couple of really serious crashes right where it changes over the years, and a traffic calming feature for traffic coming from Lincoln would probably be a benefit. I was just casually thinking about it, but again, we've got the budget for it. It depends on how much emphasis that we as a council put on road safety, and I would certainly be one that would put quite a bit on road safety, and if there's a way that we can increase the budget, we should. But thanks for that.
Thank you. That much. You go. Yeah, just a good point, Councillor Bland, just to give you that confidence around the issue of Prebbleton. We do actually have in our draft forecast going forward for installing a roundabout at the intersection of Springs and Hamptons, which is actually going to create that southern traffic calming sort of entry feature, but like it is on the north of Blake's Road. But I also have in the program the upgrade of Springs Road north of that, and also components through the township to actually introduce traffic calming so that we can actually reduce the speed down through Prebbleton. That will help on a number of perspectives, and it will also encourage traffic to not necessarily go through Prebbleton as a through route, but use the arterial routes around the perimeter to get access to the motorway and what have you. So hopefully I've got it covered.
Thank you. My first comment would be, as a motorcyclist, to Councillor Miller, more paint on the road is not a safe thing for a motorcyclist. It gets wet, it gets slippery, it actually increases the danger. I think there are other ways we should be looking at making people pay attention to our signage. It's not just high-speed roll-throughs, our stop signs. It's the slow speed, the come up, I think that's clear, I'll keep going, is very prevalent. I think we need to invite our friends in blue to do some more policing. The high-speed entry into Princeton screams out for a policeman to be sitting there ticketing people, because that's the way people learn. Either they get a ticket, their neighbour gets a ticket, it gets around that that's what the speed limit is, and that's what the consequence is. It's the locals who are worst at speeding in our roads, not our visitors. The question I have is on 5.1, we were talking about temporary traffic management audits. What were the results of those audits? Were they good, bad, indifferent?
Yes. There's a variety. Actually, we've had a discussion. We get a monthly report on traffic management audits circulated us, and we're just discussing about having a format that can be circulated to council as well, and possibly attached to this. So I'm just trying to get on one page and leaving out some of the detail that doesn't need to be there, but just giving a breakdown of that. So that's something we'll work on for the next one.
Thank you. It would be helpful because at the moment we're encountering significant numbers of road maintenance, road improvement works with temporary traffic management, and the quality of it does vary.
Yeah, we've been experiencing that for quite a long time, particularly around Rolleston, but in other areas. So, yeah.
Thank you. Certainly.
Just to add to the road safety part, it was really cool to see the road safety team at the Lincoln Uni Clubs Day, and engaging with a lot of the new students, because that's an awful lot of young people, many of whom drive into uni every day, not necessarily in the world's greatest state of mind when they're running late or whatever else. So catching them early is a really good plan, and hopefully maintain some engagement there. I was just going to ask quickly I've heard from a couple of people concerned that the work around the Prevalton roundabouts, the new ones going in, that it all seems to be happening at the same time, and isn't that a really stupid idea? That's due to NZTA funding constraints, isn't it? It actually has to be done at a certain time scale, regardless of whether or not that's how you plan it, if you had the choice. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Timothy Cordova. Thank you very much for the report. In relation to the Environment Canterbury Regional Land Transport Plan 2020, it does make for very fascinating reading, and obviously we have the largest length of unsealed road in the region at 18.5%, 1122.8 kilometres. And if we have had this discussion keeps coming up for long-term plan, it's more of a governance question, I guess, for councillors. It is a question that keeps coming up. It keeps coming back, and it will never go away until something's done about it, and it'll come back to our long-term plans. So I think as a priority, this should be raised again as one of those top priorities. We have the largest unsealed network in the region, so I guess from a governance perspective, I'd like to see that discussed again and brought up as a priority, as citizens of the Ellesmere ward that come to me and ask questions around unsealed roads, and it has major health side effects as well, dusty roads. So I think we have a duty, and if it is coming back to the table for obvious reasons, we need to seriously think about it and consider it during our long-term plan. Thank you.
Transaction update. Douglas, welcome to the front. On tab 15, page 137 of the agenda.
Thank you, Richard. So just reasonably, I'll just probably quickly move through the topics and maybe just go slowly if you want to raise anything with them. So Selman Aquatic Centre.
We're seeing some public issue. I should take it in public. I mean, there is significant expenditure which to me does not lie at the council. I'm not going to name the contractor who built that building, but in the future I might, if these things don't get sheeted under where they belong. Because clearly some of this work in my view, and this is my view, is not up to the standard that we would accept from the contractor that built our building. And so I will take that approach until I'm advised otherwise. But I think that contractor should be on warning that I will name them if it doesn't get sorted.
So raise an issue in public spread on that matter? Oh, same.
I'm concerned that something structurally unacceptable. How did it get through? How did it get this far? It wasn't picked up in the first instance. That's what concerns me.
So as we say in the report, we're breaking together into a number of parts there. We've set up this internal working group just to obviously bring us through to the finish line as sort of as complete as possible and not obviously miss anything on the way through. So you'll see a different reporting style. I understand your comment about community services, so we'll probably report through that report on the opening issues and operational issues as they come to be. So yeah, tier as it sits today.
Hope I'm on the right page now, 139. Yeah. Thank you. Look, I noticed that this building has actually obtained a Green Star rating at a cost of 120,000.
No, it isn't.
Sorry?
Yes, it's a good question.
Okay. So it was going to cost 120,000 for the proposed Green Star rating. While we're looking at an alternative design, just curious as to why we haven't gone to a Green Star rating, and would understanding what cost-saving measures and sustainability output we could have actually saved if we go through to a Green Star rating with this building. You're looking at an alternative document as I'm reading it here that will not obtain certification itself. And I just wonder, do we have the ability within our staff to actually compete with this Green Star rating if we didn't do it externally?
Well, maybe the commentary's not that well written, but as we state there, the building is built to a Green Star rating. It's getting the documentation done for that work was something we decided not to do at that stage, and therefore made that saving. We identified that $120,000. Taking on board though the comments and just I suppose where the world is on these issues now, we should reassess this as we get a bit further through the project as to whether we can go through and actually get it documented and obtain the assurances. So that's something we'll put onto a work program in the coming months.
And so just remind ourselves at the time we made a conscious decision that we would do the work to the rating and not waste money on a certification. So if people want to review that, that's fine, but I don't think a certificate's worth $120,000. So Douglas, appreciate if you're going to bring back some new information that shows that it's a couple of $1,000s cost to get something, but otherwise all it is a sticker. But we would like to see the evidence of the efficiency in the building that meets that Green Star rating. I think that's really important for us. Thank you. Nicole?
That was what I wanted to talk about, was actually seeing that what we have done and have that documented, because at least having that shows that we have gone some way to and making sure that we've got sustainable components in there in the way that it's been designed, because that's what we should be doing for the builds that we are doing now and into the future, is particularly looking at our carbon footprint. So are we looking at the whole TRRT every section? Because the one that I had was about the building fit out, and just one comment about, this is just a general comment about I see that there was looking at the selection of fabrics, and what I found interesting when I went to the Hallswell Library, some of the fabrics that they'd chosen in the children's area weren't very appropriate for children who make mess, and so it's just that to keep in mind with wipeable surfaces. Some of their ones weren't, and they, after a very short period of time, they didn't look very flat at all.
Yes, so one of the focuses is on that pragmatism of service and product. We won't get them all right for children, I might say, but the experience has to be for all members of the community. So I think there'll be some that some will go, oh no, it's not good for children, but there'll be others, particularly there's a particular carpet we're looking at of Lake Ellesmere with its textures. Won't be great for kids, but it would be an awesome product. So yeah, we've taken that in mind, but sometimes there's just a wider benefit. So yeah.
Did I hear 100% New Zealand wool carpet, Douglas?
In there from me.
Okay. Deborah.
Sorry, just continuing on the issue of sustainability. With regards to our furniture types, what is their durability or life or shelf life with regards to what we tend to choose? Do we renew them every 5 years? Or do we actually pay a higher price, buy something really good that lasts for 10 years? Or what happens if we buy something and suddenly it's not?
Sorry, I'm just really struggling with the level of that conversation.
Okay,
it's interesting stuff, but fabrics and length of chair tenure, I don't think is actually the property report.
To discuss.
I think we can ask those questions of property staff at any time. I don't think it needs to be a council meeting when we discuss these things. Thank you. Selman Sports Centre. Responsible camping, working tourism. Camping activities on council land. Yes, McInnes.
I just had a quick question around the Rhodes Park campground. Just wondering if, so obviously it says that a local group's been approached to see if they'd be interested in collecting the fees. We went down there the other day and had a wee walk along the river, and it was lovely. I was just wondering, have you looked at other alternatives, or anybody considering alternatives like school camps or rallies, because there's always vintage cars or bike rallies or whatever else, something to make use of what is actually a really awesome spot there.
I mean, we're going to build again the council policy to deal with sort of those civic one-off type arrangements and encourage where the best spots would be. So yeah, Lee and I on the roads quite regularly playing tennis, and it is a wonderful spot there. But the challenge was that there was a lot of interest supposedly in camping, but we have 4 really, really good freedom camping spots, which we promote strongly, and that's where we want to be. I know that having a few more camping spots is fine, but it is, we think, we put our compliance efforts into the 4 we've got, and that's the best effort. So.
Yeah. Just Untitled Camping Ground, getting really, really good reports from all the locals that how tidy it all is there, that council's been through there and sorted a lot of it out, so that's great reports.
Yeah, we did site inspection there with the leasees 2 weeks ago. I think they've done a fantastic job. What's there now? It's really good. They are having I think volumes for a lot of these things they would prefer were better. So, but we'll continue to work with them.
Yeah, mine was similar with Rhodes Park. It seems unfortunate that we spent money on upgrading and getting a campground to a compliant state to have it locked. And I think Councillor McInnes's thoughts on having it available for rather than just a casual hire, but available for organised events like rallies or something, is actually a way of getting that return on that upgrade costs without having to get a group monitoring casual hire. So I'd encourage us to look for those sorts of usages where we can get some return on that investment.
It's probably helpful to that question, I think. So there is a installation of a camper van waste site being installed in the campground as we speak. So I think my take on it from the local community is to understand what the desire is to actually camp there once it's operational. So it's a bit of, for want of a better word, suck it and see. Before we had long-term residents who were growing tomatoes around the boundary, and a lot of the income was actually generated from those basically full-time residents. So I think what staff have shown is a degree of flexibility, which is admirable. When there are people who have genuine need who want to camp, for instance, we had a large-scale golf tournament, and they were able to work in with that to make it work. So I think giving the staff a degree of flexibility is a great way of managing these things. And if it becomes a really highly desirable place, well, we can sort that.
Thanks, Rob. Happy with that. Colorado Community Centre, earthquake-prone buildings, West Melton Community Park. They would say West Melton's a great facility, really well used. Every time we drive past there, there's 10 kids out late at night under the summer sun using it. So well done, and I think the design's really good, and the feedback from the community has been really positive when I've been there using it as well. So congratulations on a good project. It's half done with the playground and some shade and some other things to come. Murray?
Yes, sorry, Sam, you got past me there. The earthquake-prone buildings, Sheffield Domain, Douglas, is that our building or is that a privately owned building? Is that our responsibility, or it's our responsibility to make them aware of it, but is it a responsibility to us to remediate?
It's the pavilion building, this one. Yeah, the sports pavilion's ours. Yeah, so it is a council-owned building. Yeah.
Mark?
I was on the next item.
Sure, Reed's Pit.
Yeah. It says that the remaining works to be completed by June 30, but the first workway was complete January 29. Is there any opportunity to allow, is it simple to just have it closed till the end of June, or is there some opportunity for some limited use on those walkways that are currently complete? Because we were at one point hoping to have it open this summer, or at least some of it open this summer.
Yeah, we just pushed the car parking back just a bit while we just try and see if we can get clarity for the spare access point, because we just think it's worth probably, it's been quite a long project. We've done it deliberately because we've made cost savings by the way we've done the fill. So I hear what you're saying. I think we'll make a judgment call shortly about how much longer we should just hold until we get the car park. It's obviously a weather dependent thing to get that finished. So maybe by end of June, but we are quite keen to get this access around the corner if we can resolve it. We haven't had a lot with the property owner. We just know they're making some progress towards working with us on that. So
thank you. Because I would encourage us, and perhaps our events team, when it is complete, perhaps a spring event to celebrate its opening and get the community in there and see what's there. Because I think will be a useful facility. It's just a matter of alerting the community to its availability.
It's probably an example of something that's been, sometimes you have projects that just drag out. This is one of them, but it's probably well worth letting it drag a wee bit because of the savings and because we can just have the best safety result for getting access to this site.
I think access is so key to the whole project that it would be irresponsible to open it and not have safe access to the site. So I agree with the proposed way forward. Pemberton Domain contract?
Yes.
Pemberton intersection upgrades? Gravel reserves relicensing project? Yes, Grant.
I was pleased to read the agenda because in there is 91 Selman huts licenses. So that's coming around fast, 31st of March. I just want to make sure that we are prepared to be able to provide something substantive to those hut owners, particularly as it's a dock reserve we're managing on their behalf, and we're hoping to hear from DOC around their future plans for that reserve. I'd like some significant pressure placed on DOC by the Mayor and the CEO to actually get a definitive answer from them. I think they're not being well served by the DOC prevaricating and not providing an adequate answer to us. So I think we want to be advising DOC that there is a timeline here where we are consulting with the community and we want a definitive answer.
Thanks, Grant. Douglas, you want to touch on the delay there was around understanding the future for Eastern Selman sewage and the pipeline proposed from Ellesmere and a T into that for the huts was why we hadn't gone back pre-Christmas.
And just so clear, the CEO is working in conjunction with DOC and with Matahu on all the licence issues around the hut communities. Remembering up the huts, we are the manager of that land, even though it's Crown and Derived Reserve. we issued a letter late December outlining our position, particularly with the work being done on the Ellesmere plant coming up through. I've certainly had a number of discussions with residents over the last 6 to 8 weeks. I'm sure many of you have. They are appreciative of the position the council's in. We've got a very small note in the long-term plan on where we sit, and we will be notifying shortly that proposed left-in licence, which is in line with what we have already advised from 1 July 2021, remembering that the capital spend, either option is the same, it's just the time period. The issue that we continue to work with licence holders on are changes to proposed through the licence document, and so we're sort of trying to straddle both the existing licence and where we think the new licence, we as the council would go. So we are, I think we're doing as much as we can in this space, but it is a bit messy, I accept that.
I just want to reiterate one of the concerns I have, and just referencing some of the other managed retreat communities that have happened without New Zealand, without exception, there's been a lot of bad taste and bitterness by those community members, and they all come back to the same response. Why didn't the council tell us we would be leaving 20, 30 years ago, or whatever it is, because they put significant investment into their properties or whatever it is, and it seems it's almost the last statement they make as they leave, drawing up the drawbridge. Why didn't the council tell us this years ago? And I just think we're in that space now that part of this communication is, what does your future look like here, chaps?
Yeah, I think the council's shown really good leadership on that matter, because you're quite right. It is tricky, but I don't think there would be a homeowner down there who doesn't understand that they are on a limited time. It's just what that period of limited time ends up being, and we just got to do the right thing by them, which is what we've done, but we're also going to do the right thing by that district, because ultimately these people are occupying a reserve, so it is a privilege. But yeah, I think we're in a good position in that regard. We will continue to be as helpful as we can to all parties. So I think that's the last item on the report, Richard.
It is. Moved Malcolm, seconded Shane, receive the report. Aye. All right, all those in favour? Against? Declared carried. Thanks, Douglas, for that. Now we move to public excluded. Mover and seconder for that, Hassan and Malcolm. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declared carried. And we'll break for afternoon tea. See you at 3 o'clock.